Well, good morning, everybody. I'm not sure you noticed it or not when Matt was giving his announcements about what he liked about fall or this time of year. Did you say pumpkin spice? He said pumpkin spice. Yes, my wife heard it. Don't trust me. He said pumpkin, not pumpkin. My wife and I say pumpkin because she says it that way and it just sounds cute. Thank you for being cute. Let's all say pumpkin spice this fall, shall we? And see how many people notice it, and you can say you learned it from Matt, that kind of thing. Hey, I don't normally pay attention to this on Sunday mornings, but during the worship, my phone was multiple things I was receiving at one time. Normally, I just kind of ignore it, but sometimes when they start coming in rapid succession, there could be something going on, so I checked. Nothing necessarily emergency type or whatever, but three texts in a row. The first was from my son. He's our middle son. He's traveling down to see us this week. He's going to be here all week long, which is great. And he's going to put up the Christmas lights, which is great. But he's traveling from Edmonton to, Calgary. Where does he live? Calgary, down to here. And as a dad, he worked till 2 this morning. But he's driving, 14-hour drive, whatever else. As a dad, my natural inclination is, I want to know where he's at. And he was telling us when he's leaving and so on. In my mind, I'm picturing where he's at. I want to know where he's at. I want him to be okay. And I've been doing that for him for 34 years, and will continue, obviously. I tell you that because the second text I got was from a woman whose husband went into the emergency room this morning, a good friend of mine. They're good friends of ours, and he's been struggling with some stuff, and all of a sudden kind of blew up on Friday night, went to ER, and they gave him morphine and sent him home, and they came back in, and now there's an infection and stuff. He's going into surgery in within the hour. And she's, I think, scared, right? And she didn't say all this, but in her text to me, just a couple of brief comments, just said, we're praying for you. And she wants to be sure that God knows where her husband is, or she is. And the cool thing about God is He knows. He knows. I just said that He knows. And if I, as a earthly father, want to know where my son is, how much more will God want to know where they are and where you are? And that's one of the cool aspects of God, the God we worship and serve and are invited to know, is that He knows you and where you are, here in this room or watching at home. He knows. So let's trust that He will use that knowledge to make a difference in our life. And the third text is a big sale at Costco, and so I didn't give much attention to that. John chapter 4, if you have your Bibles, turn to John chapter 4. We're in a series where we're getting to know Jesus by what He revealed about Himself in a variety of just short, unique phrases. Phrases we might sort of gloss over on our way to the big stories, the more famous stories, the more developed stories about Him and the things He taught. And John 4 contains one of those big stories. It's about an unconventional encounter He had with a woman at a place called Jacob's Well. And if you study this, you know that rabbis like Jesus typically didn't speak to women, especially a woman who might have a past. They might not know her, may have a past that might negatively impact their reputation as someone like Him. And Jesus didn't care about that. He wasn't concerned about this woman's reputation. Other people might be aware that she was a Samaritan and he was a Jewish person, and those are two racial distinctions, and they're sort of a mixed breed. They didn't they shunned each other, basically. Jesus didn't care about that. He just cared about her heart. And that's the main event, this encounter with Jesus and this woman at this well, and that's where we often stop when we read John chapter 4. But their conversation wrapped up, as it did the Samaritan woman maximized her encounter with this very famous rabbi by asking just a couple of questions about one of the issues that divided her people from the Jews. It's not the main part of the story we often think about. Maybe we do a little bit, but it's John chapter 4, verse 20. Let me read the text. And she says this to Jesus as they kind of wrapped up their time. She said, "Why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here on Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped?" It's kind of a thing religious people argue about. Why do your people worship like that? Why use liturgy instead of where you recite prayers instead of praying from the heart like we do? Why do you have communion this way instead of that? What's the deal with baptizing babies? That doesn't seem right. Why do your pastors dress like they're going to the movies instead of going to church? Why do they always wear, tennis shoes and jeans and stuff? Why? You're doing it wrong, we say sometimes to each other. You're doing it weird. The way, the place, the time, the style of your worship is missing the point. You should do it my way. You should do it our way. And Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. When you understand what I'm about, he's saying, the place, the time, the order, your preferences won't matter. The time is coming, verse 23. Indeed, it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And the Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit. So those who worship him, you should really try this, he's saying, must worship in spirit and truth. Heavenly Father, would you open our hearts to you as you're revealing this part of your care and your concern for the way we worship, the priorities of worship. Teach us what worship means. Help us be open to your leading. Teach us to know about us and about you and how we can follow and honor that relationship and know you more. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. If someone were to ask you why you came to church, why you're watching online, whatever it might be, a lot of us would say why we're doing this is we're here to worship. In simple terms, worship is responding to God. That's what worship is. It's expressing devotion to God for who he is, expressing gratitude for all that he provides. Worship is not just a box for to check off on our long list of religious duties. Worship is attempting to express things like this: from the depths of my heart, thank you. Praise you for the strength, the forgiveness, the purpose, the grace I find in you. Praise you for giving me access to you. I'm so grateful for you because there are days when you, God, seem to be the only uncontaminated aspect of my life. So for all you've done, I count my blessings, I express my thanksgiving. Words like that, that's worship. Now, you understand, I hope, that worship is not just singing. It's not just music, although music is a vital part of how we worship. Songs have this amazing capacity to express thanksgiving and love and loyalty, and gets to a part of us inside that words sometimes cannot. But prayer is also worship. So is obedience, giving, disciplines like fasting and reading the Word and listening and meditating. Communion is an act of worship. Today is World Communion Sunday. It's emphasized hopefully around the world. That's an act of worship. So obviously this will be worship in a few minutes. To worship is to let gratitude well up deep inside on the soul level. That's why Jesus gave these three words. He said, worship in spirit, he said. Be deeply thankful to the core of your being. Be aware. Be touched. Be grateful. And on days when it's difficult to see anything good and be grateful because of the way pain sometimes rolls over us, we can still worship. We can, because we can respond to the truth of God's identity. We say, I worship you because you are my Lord. You are my God. Worship, this expression, it reveals our true beliefs. It refocuses our thinking. It's the path to fellowship with God. It's acknowledging God's position. Give you just, I'm not sure how well this works, but a modern day example might be what we saw 2 weeks ago with the Queen of England, right? Because of who she is or was, people in Britain stood in line, a queue, they call it, a queue that was 5 miles long. They shuffled along for 5 miles for 22 hours, some of them, in order to just walk by her casket, to be near her casket, and just to give a few moments of contemplation, just a few moments. 5 miles, 22 hours. And no one called that worship, but for several days, the Brits declared their devotion. They pledged their allegiance to the crown, to the Queen. And did you notice how many times, if you watched it at all, how many times they sang "My Country 'Tis of Thee"? I was amazed at how often they played that song. It's actually "Hail to the Queen," "Hail to the King," whatever else, but they used our song, "My Country 'Tis of Thee." If you tell them that, by the way, they get really offended, right? In the U.S., we don't hold our leaders up quite so high or honor them quite so much, I don't think. I told you some people I was telling you, I sat behind Senator Kramer on Thursday night as we flew back we had a group of us who were in Chicago for a conference this week, and as we flew back, I was right behind Senator Kramer, and I didn't bow, I didn't curtsy, I didn't think, in fact, I actually kicked the back of his seat a couple of times when I was crossing my big old leg here, kind of thing. He didn't notice because he was so focused on, not government, he was focused on Candy Crush, which I found fascinating to sit behind the center and see that, right? We don't worship people. But if you're a follower of Jesus, eventually you begin to understand and return with regularity to times and places of worship in response to what God has done and because of who he is, spirit and truth. Where we worship doesn't matter as long as we worship in spirit and in truth. And when that's happening inside us, worship experiences, they mark us. They change us. Think about it. When you think back in your life, and maybe a short time that you've known Christ, or maybe it's a long time, can you think of times that were particularly moving for you as worship experiences? Can you think of some occasions, some worship services, some worship moments that are especially meaningful to you, that have marked you, where God met you there? I was thinking about this yesterday, and I had two very strong memories as I thought, what are some times where worship really influenced me? And ironically, one of the times was something we experienced in Chicago this week. At the end of our conference, I took our staff who were along, Matt and Aaliyah and Bruce and Holly, and we went to Willow Creek, this very famous church that was very influential to me for a part of my life. And it's this huge, massive campus where church leaders from around the world would come multiple times during the year to learn about evangelism, to learn about leadership, to learn about serving, to learn about worship and so on. For me, it used to be an amazing place. But now there's been a falling, there's been a division, there's been a breaking of that church's mission, it seems, and now it seems somewhat hollow, and it was hard, frankly, to be there. And as we walked around the place that had been so familiar to me, I hadn't been there for a lot of years, but I showed the staff the church's new giant auditorium built about 12 years ago, seats 7,000 people. So fancy, so amazing, and all that kind of thing from a building standpoint. And then I took them into Willow's original auditorium. It's just a tiny little kind of a chapel. It only seats like 3,500 people. It's just a tiny little thing. And we walked in, and I wasn't thinking about this going in. I was surprised that it came back, but what raced into my mind was this pastor's conference I attended like 25 years ago. And they closed the conference with a worship concert. And the most popular worship song in the world at that time was a song called Shout to the Lord. It was recorded by Hillsong and by Darlene Sheck. I think you referenced it a time or two, Dan. And Darlene was there. She was kind of a surprise guest. This whole thing was a big surprise. And a full band and a full choir, and there were 3,500 pastors and spouses and church leaders and so on. That's a great kind of group to lead worship in front of, because they're just sort of a gusto to it. And worship for an hour and a half kind of thing. It was amazing. It was spirit-led worship. It was loud worship, and it moved me so deeply that night. And at the end, when they closed the worship service with Shout to the Lord, which we were all waiting for, I was sitting next to an old camp friend of mine from Minot, a guy named Mark Middleberg, and we used to go to Crystal Springs together as kids. And at the time, he was on the staff at Willow Creek, and we were in the front row off to the side and singing at the top of our lungs like so many others in the room. And when we got to that song, he nudged me. And he pointed back. We both looked over our shoulders, and you see this room, people, hands raised, and people singing, and the volume coming from the people was just so overwhelming. And he pointed to them, and he said, "I wonder if this is what heaven will be like, singing with the angels." And I want it to be. I was so caught up in worship that night. I was even smiling a little bit, which is odd for me during worship, but I was. And people worshiping the Lord in spirit to the core of their being, thinking only of praising God, it would seem. It's a very powerful worship memory. Got any like that? A moving worship experience? And yesterday when I was thinking about this, I thought of the other one on my mind. It happened on Friday, 2 days ago. I was praying for a hurting friend. And I just wanted to send a bit of an encouragement, and I wrote out just a sentence or two. And then I attached that song I played back in August, All Is Well, that I played a little bit for you. It may not mean that much to you, but to me, I listened to that song and knew my friend was going to get it, and I just had this overwhelming sense of worship, and tears flowed. Just being God. I don't have to have 3,500 people in a room with a full band. And it was me and God, and it was such a moving time as I was so aware of God's capacity to love and care. Worship is a wonderful thing, friends. Maybe more wonderful than we realize. Because it should compel us. And I want to encourage you in the days ahead as we worship in places like this, or on Friday afternoon and sitting at your desk, whatever it might be, don't hold back. Worship, it seems, in my estimation, is growing here. And God is using Dan and Allie and our team. And Dan's not Darlene, Jack. But God didn't send her here from Hillsong with Shout to the Lord. He sent Dan, and I'm so glad he did. To lead us before the throne of God. Praise God for that. Let worship experiences stretch us to worship in spirit to the core of our being and to worship in truth. And we're going to end the service in a few minutes, and we're going to gather by worshiping around the Lord's table. But there's a few other truths I want to just review with you, maybe some questions we should ask, like this one. At its heart, is worship supposed to be people-centered or God-centered? What do you think? Of course. We should be clear on the fact that worship at its heart is God-centered. I mean, it's natural to have opinions. It's natural to have preferences. But worship is not about us. It's about God the Father. It's not about me and you. It's not about getting my needs met. It's not about my preferred style. It's not about my personal tastes or preferences. In the worship Jesus wants us to experience, we gather and encounter the presence of the living God. And we declare his greatness and his goodness and his glory. It's not complicated. It's so easily in our human experience moves in other directions. In fact, let me provide you with a few ways that worship can get off track, as it does quite often. These can be quite dangerous. One of the dangers, for example, sometimes in some places, in some churches, for some people, worship becomes just kind of casual. Casual worship is always off track. The writer of 2 Chronicles presents a picture of this. It says that Solomon, when he built the temple, he filled it with things of great beauty, of great value, including gold shields that were awesome for people who just looked at them. These shields were a reminder to these specific people who were just learning about worship for the very first time of the greatness and splendor and goodness of God. And God led Solomon to choose these very costly items as an expression of the value that people place on God, because those people needed to be taught that lesson. I'm not saying we need to have gold shields, not at all. But Solomon put them in the temple, and then Solomon died. And his son Rehoboam took over, and the Bible tells us that Rehoboam abandoned his devotion to God. And at one point, the king of Egypt came up and he plundered the temple and took all the stuff away, and took away the shields of gold. In 2 Chronicles 12, verse 10, just a small little point, it says, so King Rehoboam replaced the shields of gold with shields of bronze. He didn't forget about the temple. He just downgraded it. He said, that's good enough. He had this casual approach to worship. Now contrast that with another scene in Exodus 19. Okay, just keep these two in mind. The passage comes shortly after God had delivered Israel from slavery. And they'd crossed the Red Sea on their exodus, and the prophet Miriam grabbed the tambourine after Pharaoh and his armies were destroyed, and she began to dance and to sing, and she said, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. And it's the beginning of corporate worship for the people of God. It's where it started, many people think. And then they came to Mount Sinai, where they would encounter God in a very visible way. And that's way beyond our experience. We have nothing like it in our experience, but try to imagine the scene, Exodus 19. Verse 10 says, then the Lord told Moses, go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they're ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down to Mount Sinai as all the people watch. On the morning of the third day, verse 16, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came on the mountain, and there was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn. I always think of the Vikings game. It was that kind of thing, right? And all the people just trembled. This had never happened in human experience. They're encountering God. And Moses led them out from their camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Can you imagine being in that audience? And all of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire, and the smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. And as the blast of the ram's horn grew louder and louder, Moses spoke. He prayed. And God thundered his reply. Can you imagine how the people of God would have responded to that? Being in the awesome, wonderful presence of God. How appropriate would it have been if some of the people in that moment would have said, you know, I think we're going to take off. We're not singing the songs we like to sing at the foot of the mountain, like that tambourine. I love that tambourine song. We're not doing it. What's the deal with that? Or imagine people saying, I don't like it when Moses leads worship. I like Aaron better. We'll come back when Aaron's leading. We like him better. Or imagine someone saying, this worship is too, I don't know, smoky. It's too much mystery. I like worship to be much more informal. Or imagine someone else saying, well, this stuff's okay, but I don't like it when Miriam did all that dancing, you know. You really like the tambourine song? I didn't like that at all. I like this better. I don't think that happened. And you know it didn't. I think the people of God were filled with awe and wonder, and they trembled, and they hoped, and they feared, because there in the middle of nowhere, this bunch of ex-slaves, all of a sudden, there's the living God before them, and there was mystery, and there was awe, and there was life. And I know we're at a different time. We clearly are. But what is the same is that when we bow before God in prayer, when we open God's Word, when we come in here and gather for the purpose of worship, we're in the presence of God. The God of the mountain. We're always in his presence. He always knows where we are. But when worship comes, when we come to open ourselves up to him. And as a church body, we come before the God who made heaven and earth, the God who shook the mountains, who roared like thunder, the God who holds your life in mind in the palm of his hand, the God who sent his son to die for us, the God of the mountain, the God of the cross. And he is here right now, just as he was on the mountain, in all the mystery and awesomeness and righteousness of it all. And so when we come in here, we can wear jeans, and we can wear dresses and funny-looking tennis shoes and stuff, but in our hearts, we should be prepared. We should confess. We should be focused. We should have our questions ready and our hearts sensitive and aware of that which God is, all the reasons God is deserving of our thankfulness. Don't just go through the motions. Don't just finish your coffee and wipe the crumbs off your, come in here and drift in and be too casual. Don't just sit here and focus on finding the harmony of the song. Psalm 66 verse 2 says, make his praise, anybody know the word? Make his praise glorious. And we can't do that half-heartedly. When you come to worship, don't play games or aim for the high notes to impress the people in front of you. Just say to God, I'm fully present, and I'm listening, and I'm praising, and I'm confessing, and I'm responding. And if for a moment my mind wanders off, I'll bring myself back. Every moment of worship, I'm offering myself to you. Come prepared, fully invest yourself in these moments. And come with a sense of awe. We've been joking around our offices a little bit. We say a lot of times, well, that's awesome. And one of our staff is saying, we can't say awesome about pizza or whatever. Awesome reserved for God. We don't necessarily we have to do it that way, but we should be aware of the sense of awe we ought to have before God. Awe. The God who made the mountain shake and the thunder roar and caused the knees of strong men and women to tremble, that's the God we worship. That's our mountain. And this is a place, not the only place, but the place where we, the people of God, gathered. And that's an awesome thing. And God is an awesome God. C.S. Lewis wrote a famous trilogy called the Chronicles of Narnia. In the first books, some children are on their way to meet Aslan, who is a figure in these books. He represents Christ. And the children are being guided in the book by this husband and wife, and when they hear the name Aslan, when they hear the Christ sort of name, something happens inside them. Like the people in the story of Exodus, they're filled with awe and wonder. And in the book, one of the young girls, she says this, "I feel rather nervous about meeting Aslan." And the wife says, "That you will, dearie, make no mistake. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just silly." And the young girl named Lucy says, "Then isn't he safe?" "Safe," says the husband. "Don't you hear anything my wife tells you? Who said anything about being safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king." And when the Israelites came before the mountain, they encountered clouds of thick darkness and thunder roaring and God. And they say to Moses later on in Exodus, "Don't let us get too near the mountain. Keep us away from that. Don't let God stand too near us. We're nervous about the whole deal. We're not sure he's safe." And Moses says in words that have come back to the people of God throughout the centuries, of course he's not safe. God is not some tame, domesticated being waiting to get your requests and see what he can do about them. And he's not going to avoid surprising you. He's not going to ask anything, not going to avoid asking things of you. Who said anything about him being safe? But he's good. He's the king. He's the Almighty. And he astonishes people with wonder upon wonder. And so, friends, no casual, half-hearted, distracted worship, not here. Because God deserves better than that. Casual worship is off track. So is consumer-oriented worship. It's kind of related. There are people who come to worship just waiting to be satisfied. I like my brand of worship, my brand of music, my brand of scripture, my brand of teaching. And if I don't get it, I'm going to grumble and scowl. I might write a letter to the manager. I will refuse to give praise and adoration to the God of the universe because I don't like the tune or I don't want the particular instruments played that I hear at the volume I'm hearing them. I want a particular worship leader, or if I don't get it, I'll withhold my worship or go somewhere else. Or maybe I'll let others in my little circle know this style does not meet my requirements for worship. The first church that I served out of seminary was in Southern California. I was on staff there, and one of the most influential people in the church was a very confident man who was a leader for years. He was wealthy, and he carried himself with a lot of power. I'll just call him Daniel, and every time something happened in worship that displeased him, he would let us know, the pastoral staff know. Sometimes he would do it verbally. Sometimes he'd send us a note. Oftentimes he would stand at the door with his Bible under his arm, and he would clutch it like this, and he'd have the worship, the bulletin, sticking out of his Bible. He placed it very carefully to the order of worship. We could see it. He'd put it on top of his Bible or behind it, whatever else. We could see the order of worship. And he would have notes on the bulletin. Too long. Too loud. Didn't pray for the missionaries. Should have used this text. He'd have these critical notes. He would stand at the door long enough that we had the chance to read his notes. It was kind of irritating. It really was. No one here does that, friends. I don't hear a lot of complaints about things here, but I understand that humanly speaking, all of us will go through worship services that move us and some that won't. And there will be times we'll have thoughts about some aspect that we particularly like or some aspect that we don't. And we need to manage those thoughts prayerfully and come to worship to give, not to consume. To know him, not to be known. I grew up in this church. A very famous memory I've had. Some of you, I've shared this with you. There's a guy named Jack. That's a real name. Some of you know what I'm talking about. He wasn't crazy about music because he couldn't carry a tune in the swimming pool. Right? Lousy singer. And when he tried to sing, it would throw him off as well as all those around him. And so he came for the sermon. That's why he came to church. But God had his heart. He wasn't perfect, but I think God had his heart. So Jack would sit every Sunday morning right down here. And when we sang songs, he wouldn't sing along at all. He wouldn't sing a note. He wouldn't move his lips. He would sit and stare straight ahead. And I would sometimes help lead worship, and it kind of threw me off until I found out that what he did, he was simply meditating, carefully meditating, sincerely meditating on the words, and letting those words move him in worship, because he knew he wasn't just a consumer who would get this the way. He found a way, even in the music he didn't like to sing, to meet with God and to know God. And he taught me how important that was. We can't be here as consumers. John 4, the Samaritan woman's talking to Jesus, and she said, where should we worship God? Is it on the Samaritan place of worship at Mount Gerizim, or is the right place Jerusalem like the Israelites? And Jesus explains, it's not about geography. God's bigger than that. Which, by the way, we should keep in mind more often. God is not foolish. He's not petty. Time's going to come when people realize this is not about this mountain or that mountain. God is looking, Jesus says, for people who worship in spirit to the core of their being and in truth aware of who he is. And some of us, we prefer quiet contemplative worship. Some prefer loud, praise-oriented, fast-paced worship. In fact, let's just say those are the only two categories. How many of you prefer more contemplative, quiet music? Raise your hands. That's me, by the way. How many prefer more fast-paced, kind of uplifting music? Okay, how many of you? Okay, that's kind of, I've always found the fast-paced to be more common. I get that. Do quiet worshipers, people like me who are more contemplative, do they have scriptural support for how they worship? Yes. God's word says, be still and know that I'm God. Do loud, fast-paced worshipers have scriptural support? Yes. Psalm 150 says, praise him with a clash of cymbals. Steve loves that verse. With loud, resounding cymbals, let everything that has breath praise the Lord. There needs to be a place where people of various styles and generations so come together, and we need to accept one another and learn from one another. I've told some of you in the past how I am at concerts and at football games and in worship. I sit there like this, and I'm having a great time. I really am. I sit there like this, right? I'm not all that expressive, and I'm not all that outwardly expressive in worship. But my heart needs to be open. And from time to time, maybe I should smile, raise a hand, and admit, God, sometimes my faith is all in my head, and I really need you to touch my heart. Maybe God is calling some of us to be more expressive. Maybe God is calling some of us to be less expressive. I don't know. But God is clearly calling us to be engaged in worship. But the ultimate truth is, worship is for sinners. And if you had to be perfect to worship, none of us would be here. God says an amazing thing in Isaiah 29, verse 14. He said, these people come to me with their mouths, and they honor me with their lips, but their words and their hearts are far from me. Their worship is just rules taught by men. Therefore, I will, God says, what? People are saying words of worship they don't mean. And God says, therefore, I will, what? Destroy them? Punish them? Forget them? No. God says these people aren't coming to me with a passion for me as they worship. They're not. Therefore, God says, I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. And he does. He sends his only son. Our God is so awesome. He could toss us aside for the way we are unfaithful. But instead, he wants to continue to invite and to entice you and me with his amazing grace and his amazing power and his amazing faithfulness. And he's calling us to notice, to learn more, to experience more, so that our worship will move deep within our hearts and our will. That's the God who calls us to be here, to worship, to acknowledge, to declare his greatness and his goodness and his glory with all of our heart and all of our soul all of our strength, all of our mind, to remember the truth that our God is infinite. Listen to this list. I'm going to end with this. Our God is infinite. He's immutable, which means he never changes. His purposes are unfailing. His promises are unassailable. It's because God is immutable that he never changes that we may rest assured that nothing, not trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword will ever separate us from the love of Christ. That's our God. Our God is omnipotent, which means he's all-powerful. Our God is omniscient, which means he's all-knowing. Our God is omnipresent. He is always everywhere, and he's aware every moment of every day exactly what we're up against. He knows our ways, and he is with us always. There's no place on this earth we can go that he doesn't see and know of and isn't bigger than. Our God is wise. He's full of perfection and unchanging wisdom. God is faithful. He is infinitely, unchangeably true. No one ever trusted him in vain. Our God is holy. He's infinitely, unchangingly perfect. Revelation 4 verse 8 reminds us that God will not act from selfishness. He will not be tempted. He'll always be sacred and divine. It's a great quote from Tozer. Some of you know about him. He says, it's a strange and beautiful eccentricity of God that he has allowed his heart to be emotionally identified with us. Self-sufficient as he is, he wants our love and will not be satisfied till he gets it. Free as he is, he's let his heart be bound to us forever. God's love is active, drawing us to himself. His love is personal. He doesn't love humanity in some vague sense. He loves you and me. And his love for us knows no beginning and no end. Because God is good. He's just. He's merciful. He's love. So, on the night when Jesus was betrayed, he invited his friends, and those who followed him, to gather in this upper room to join him for supper. And he took bread, and they broke it. He said, "This is my body given for you. So remember." And after supper, he took the cup and he poured it and said, "This is my blood shed for you for the forgiveness of your sins. Remember." He invites us to do that now. Us to do that now. So would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, Almighty God, from the depths of our heart, thank you and praise you for the strength and the forgiveness and the purpose and for the grace we find in you. We praise you for giving us access to you. We're so grateful because there are days when you, God, seem to be the only uncontaminated aspect of my life, our lives. So for all you've done, we count our blessings. We express our thanksgiving. Would you lead us now as we conclude the service in worship? We're not simply going through the motions. We're not just taking a piece of bread and a little cup. We're responding to what you've invited us to experience. So bless these elements. Bless these moments with the wonder that you've invited us to know you. We thank you that you continue to entice us to follow and be with you. Give us thoughts of your goodness, your grace, your power, your majesty, your might, your holiness, your sovereignty, your presence, your love. And compel in us a greater desire to follow and know, be intimate with you. Bless this time we pray. If you're a server, why don't you come now and as the elements are passed, just take there's a 2-cup thing and there's a cup in one or juice in one and bread in the other. Just take that. Hang on to it. We'll take it together in just a moment in worship of our King.